I stood my ground, eyes locked with the so-called HOA officers, the morning light streaming through the cracked door casting long shadows across their makeshift badges. The man in front of me adjusted his belt, as if that would somehow make their charade more legitimate, and repeated in a harsher tone, "Step outside now. You are in violation of HOA codes and under arrest." I chuckled dryly, the absurdity of the situation settling like a weight in my chest. "Arrest me? On what grounds exactly? Because I refuse to abide by your fictional HOA statutes?" My voice was steady, but every muscle in my body remained tense, trained for confrontation. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, peeked from her living room window, her smirk widening as if this was the highlight of her otherwise mundane life. The second man, slightly shorter and stockier, stepped forward and banged his fist lightly against the doorframe, as if trying to assert authority through sheer volume. "Don't play games, we have orders. Compliance is mandatory." I inhaled slowly, recalling every lesson about handling imposters and fraudsters. This wasn't some typical HOA dispute over lawn maintenance or trash cans left in the driveway. This was a full-on operation designed to intimidate, coerce, and possibly abduct. I placed a hand over my FBI badge, making sure it was visible through the crack of the door, and said clearly, "I am an FBI agent. Your little act stops here. Leave now, or I will be forced to escalate this matter." A flicker of doubt crossed their faces, but they didn't back down. Instead, the shorter one pulled out a small handheld radio, pressing the button and speaking in clipped tones that made no sense to me. "Unit Alpha to control. Subject refuses to comply. Proceeding with protocol." Their voices, laced with false authority, sounded rehearsed, as if they had practiced this moment 1,000 times in front of a mirror. My instincts screamed at me that they were dangerous, more than just petty fraudsters. These weren't amateurs trying to play HOA enforcement. They had an agenda far deeper, darker. I grabbed my phone from the nearby table, keeping the door just ajar enough to maintain my view of them, and began recording everything. The moment I hit record, their eyes narrowed, sensing the threat that digital proof posed to their elaborate scheme. "Turn off that device," the stockier imposter barked. I didn't. I stood firm, my voice calm but authoritative. "This conversation is being recorded. Any attempt to violate my rights will be documented for prosecution." Their faces twisted with frustration, and the taller one attempted to push the door open, as if physical force could legitimize their cause. I resisted the urge to slam the door shut immediately. Instead, I spoke one final time. "This is your last warning. Leave now, or you'll be dealing with a real law enforcement agency." The tension hung thick in the air, palpable and heavy, until finally they retreated, stepping back and disappearing down the street like shadows fading into the morning mist. I exhaled slowly, my mind already racing through the next steps. This wasn't over. The audacity of their attempt screamed of a vendetta or a larger conspiracy. Why target me of all people? The logical answer was simple. Someone knew who I was and wanted me out of the way. I grabbed my car keys, planning to head straight to headquarters and report the incident. But then I hesitated. I needed evidence, more than just a shaky recording from my phone. I needed to know who these people were, why they thought they could arrest me, and most importantly, who was behind Karen. As I walked toward my vehicle, I noticed my neighbor across the street, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a nervous expression, watching the entire event unfold from his porch. I gave him a nod, and he quickly turned his head away, almost as if guilty for witnessing what had just happened. My gut told me he was hiding something. I drove straight to the local precinct, parking in the back alley to avoid drawing attention. I entered, flashed my FBI credentials, and explained the situation to the desk sergeant, who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "HOA police, you say?" he remarked dryly, already doubting the legitimacy of my claim. I handed over the phone, the recording playing back the entire confrontation. His eyebrows shot up as the dialogue became clear, especially the part where the imposters referred to their protocol. "This doesn't sound right," he admitted, frowning. "We don't have any sanctioned HOA enforcement units in this jurisdiction, let alone armed personnel." I knew it. I was dealing with something off the books, far removed from the usual HOA nonsense. "Exactly," I said firmly. "This is more than a simple neighborhood squabble. Someone's trying to intimidate me, and I want a full investigation." With the precinct now on alert, I returned home, determined to set up security cameras and trace any movement in and around the property. My training kicked in, every precaution being executed as if I was preparing for a raid. I installed the cameras strategically, one covering the front door, another facing the driveway, and a third focusing on the street. I configured them to record continuously, providing me with indisputable evidence should these imposters try to return. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, casting sharp light across the manicured lawns of the neighborhood. Yet nothing happened. No sign of Karen, the fake officers, or any suspicious activity. The calm felt temporary, deceptive, and I knew better than to lower my guard. I made contact with a few trusted colleagues at the bureau, briefing them about the situation and requesting discreet background checks on the residents, especially Karen and the man across the street. By evening, I had pieced together a preliminary profile of Karen. She wasn't just some overbearing neighbor. Her background showed a history of legal disputes with homeowners associations, multiple restraining orders, and a penchant for creating fake authority structures. Her life seemed entangled in a web of fraudulent claims and desperate power plays. My theory began to solidify. This was personal. The fake HOA officers weren't random, they were her pawns. I spent the night analyzing the footage, every second scrutinized for anomalies. At around midnight, I caught movement, a shadow flitting past the driveway camera, fast and silent. It was too calculated to be random. Someone was surveilling me, and it was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, my mind sharp, focused. Tomorrow, I would confront Karen, not with words, but with evidence and undeniable authority. I would expose the entire charade. What I didn't realize then was that I was about to step into a far more dangerous game, one where the stakes were my career, my safety, and possibly my life. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still racing from the events of the previous day. I reviewed the surveillance footage once again, frame by frame, scrutinizing every detail. The shadow that had crossed the driveway the night before was too precise to be coincidental. Whoever it was, they knew exactly what they were doing. I knew I couldn't act recklessly. These people were dangerous, and my best weapon was patience and precision. I decided to take a methodical approach. I started by gathering public records and legal documents related to Karen. Her full name, Karen Whitmore, appeared in multiple local court cases, mostly involving HOA disputes and accusations of fraudulent behavior. She had been involved in a bitter battle with her previous homeowners association, claiming they violated her rights at every turn. Each document painted a picture of a woman obsessed with control, someone who manipulated the system to serve her own interests. Using my bureau connections, I discreetly pulled up phone records and vehicle registrations linked to Karen. The results were telling. Several phone numbers were linked to prepaid accounts, likely purchased to avoid tracing. The vehicle registrations pointed to rented cars, some of which matched descriptions I'd heard from other neighbors who had complained about strange visitors in the area. I compiled all this information into a secure file on my encrypted laptop, determined not to leave any loose ends. Throughout the day, I remained vigilant. I monitored the cameras, tracking every movement within a 3-block radius. By late afternoon, a pattern began to emerge. A black SUV, unmarked and nondescript, would appear at seemingly random intervals, never parking for more than a few minutes before disappearing down a different street. I focused the camera on it, hoping to capture the driver's face or any identifying marks. Nothing yet, just blurred images and shifting shadows. Around dusk, I noticed a neighbor approaching my property from across the street. The same man with thick glasses who had watched the confrontation earlier was now walking towards me, his steps hesitant, almost furtive. I remained inside, observing through the peephole. He stopped at the edge of my property, glancing around nervously as if unsure whether to proceed or retreat. After a few tense moments, he turned and walked away. I knew then that my presence was already under surveillance. These people weren't just making idle threats. They were actively gathering intel on me, mapping my routines and likely waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. My FBI training kicked into overdrive. I documented everything: timestamps, vehicle movements, and the neighbor's odd behavior, into a secure report. I planned to present this to my superior as soon as possible, knowing full well they might be skeptical. The night fell heavier than usual, blanketing the neighborhood in an eerie silence. I set up additional motion sensors around the perimeter of my property, each linked to my phone for instant alerts. My phone buzzed multiple times throughout the night, false alarms mostly, branches swaying, cats wandering by. But one alert stood out. A new figure appeared, distinct from the usual passers-by and the neighbor. A woman, mid-30s, dressed in dark clothes, crouched near the hedge bordering my driveway. She moved with the precision of someone trained, not merely lurking but actively scanning for weaknesses. I activated the external spotlight, causing her to freeze, her eyes momentarily reflecting the light like a wild animal caught in the headlights. She didn't run. Instead, she stared straight at me for a few seconds before retreating into the shadows. I snapped a picture with my phone, already backing it up to my encrypted cloud storage. My suspicions were confirmed. This was no random harassment. It was an organized attempt to intimidate or worse. The next step was clear. I needed to confront Karen directly, but carefully. I couldn't afford to play into her hands by making a premature move. Instead, I planned to observe her from a distance, hoping to catch a slip, a mistake, or any sign of a larger network at work. Early the next morning, I donned plain clothes, making sure I blended in with the neighborhood joggers and early commuters. I parked a few blocks away and started walking toward Karen's house, noting the oddities along the way. Neighbors whose eyes seemed too fixed on me, cars parked in peculiar positions, and the unsettling silence that surrounded what should have been a normal suburban block. Karen's house was a modest two-story structure, with neatly trimmed hedges and a front porch that looked inviting to any casual observer. But I knew better. The moment I crossed into her line of sight, I saw her peek through the curtains, a faint smirk playing across her lips. I didn't stop. I passed by slowly, careful not to draw unnecessary attention, and continued my surveillance from a discreet distance. I spent the entire day monitoring her house, noting every visitor, every phone call, and every strange movement. By late afternoon, a car I hadn't seen before pulled up, black heavily tinted windows, unmarked plates. A man stepped out, mid-40s, bald, with a face that could have belonged to any number of hardened criminals. He walked straight up to Karen's door, exchanged words I couldn't hear, and then left, leaving her standing motionless as if waiting for something. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Karen wasn't acting alone. She was part of a larger operation, possibly linked to identity fraud, illegal surveillance, or even something more sinister. I felt the weight of the investigation pressing down on me, but I couldn't back down now. As dusk fell again, I returned home, making sure to erase any digital footprint that could lead them to suspect me. My phone buzzed once more, a notification from my surveillance system. Another figure, this time different. A man in a dark hoodie, slowly approaching my front door. I stared at the live feed, my heart tightening. He stopped just before the threshold, paused, and then turned around, disappearing into the night. Sleep was out of the question. I sat by the monitors, eyes glued to the screens, piecing together the mystery one frame at a time. Tomorrow, I knew, would be a day of answers, or at least more questions. One thing was certain. Karen's game of power, control, and deceit was far from over, and I was now entangled deeper than ever. Morning arrived with a strange sense of anticipation, a heaviness that seemed to settle over the neighborhood, as if the very air was laced with tension. I knew that today could be pivotal, and I had to remain sharp. My surveillance setup remained intact, every camera angle monitored, every sensor alert logged. My plan was simple. Observe Karen without revealing my presence and wait for any indication of escalation. As I sipped my black coffee, I reviewed the footage from the night before once more, zooming in on the man in the dark hoodie who had approached my door. His features were obscured, but his movements were methodical, calculated, clearly not random. The fact that he never made any attempt to break in suggested that his goal wasn't theft, but intimidation or reconnaissance. I tagged every frame and timestamp for later analysis, preparing to cross-reference with any future activity. Around mid-morning, Karen's front door opened, and a woman stepped out, a sharp contrast to Karen's brash personality. She appeared calm, composed, mid-30s, dressed in casual but expensive attire, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. They exchanged words briefly, too quiet to hear, and the second woman entered Karen's house. I focused my lens on them, certain this meeting wasn't by chance. Their body language spoke volumes. The way Karen stood rigid, the way the other woman gestured subtly, almost imperceptibly, before closing the door. I decided to take action but tread carefully. I had to remain covert. I left my home under the guise of running errands, knowing full well my movements would be tracked. My destination was a small cafe about 2 blocks away, chosen strategically so I could observe without being observed. I positioned myself by a window with a clear line of sight to Karen's house, my laptop open and streaming live feeds from my surveillance system. Hours passed, the sun climbing steadily, and still, the neighborhood seemed unusually quiet. That was until early afternoon when a delivery van pulled up near Karen's residence. The driver, a bulky man with a baseball cap, seemed ordinary at first glance. But as he stepped out, I noticed the subtle glances exchanged between him and Karen's second visitor. The package he carried was unmarked, but too heavy to be normal groceries. My gut screamed that something illicit was afoot. The delivery man walked up to the front door, exchanged a few words with Karen and left just as quietly as he had arrived. I noted the exact time and captured images of the transaction. My mind raced. What was in that package? Electronics, documents, surveillance equipment? Whatever it was part of a larger puzzle I needed to solve. I continued observing throughout the afternoon, careful not to arouse suspicion. Another neighbor, an elderly woman who lived a few doors down, wandered past Karen's house. Her eyes lingered briefly on the front door before darting away, a subtle but telling gesture. She seemed fearful, almost as if Karen's influence extended beyond direct confrontation. I considered reaching out to her later, sensing she might hold key information. By evening, the black SUV reappeared, just as it had the day before, creeping silently into position. This time, I managed to get a clear look at the license plate, though it was partially obscured. I took several high-resolution photos and began running the numbers through a bureau database. The plates returned as registered to a rental agency in a neighboring state. The vehicle had been rented under a false identity, a classic tactic used to evade detection. As darkness enveloped the block once again, I sensed the weight of unseen eyes watching me. My phone buzzed, a message from a trusted colleague at headquarters. It was brief, just a few words. Proceed with caution. This isn't a standard harassment case. A chill ran down my spine. I knew then that I was dealing with something far more dangerous, possibly linked to organized crime or a covert operation designed to infiltrate private homes for reasons unknown. My training dictated I proceed with extreme caution. Around midnight, the surveillance system picked up motion near Karen's property once more. This time it wasn't a single figure, but 2. Both moved with precision, avoiding the main camera angles, sticking to the shadows. Their synchronized movements indicated experience and coordination. I captured every moment, knowing that these images would be critical for later investigation. One of the figures approached the second-story window of Karen's house, where I had previously noticed the second woman standing. They seemed to exchange something, an object too small to identify but likely important. The brief interaction lasted no more than 30 seconds before both figures retreated, vanishing into the night. I sat back, my eyes weary but sharp, piecing together the timeline. Each movement, each exchange seemed deliberate, part of a larger, meticulously planned operation. The facade of HOA disputes was merely a smokescreen, a way to keep the world oblivious to their real motives. Suddenly my phone rang. It was my superior, Agent Mitchell. His voice was calm but carried an undertone of urgency. "Have you made any progress?" I relayed everything in detail, from the bogus HOA arrests to the nighttime surveillance and the mysterious visitors. His reply was measured. "Keep digging. We don't know how deep this goes yet, but I want daily updates. Be careful." I hung up, knowing better than to let my guard down. I reviewed the footage one last time before shutting down the system for the night. My plan for the next day was clear: confront the elderly neighbor and dig into the rental agency linked to the black SUV. I needed more than just visual evidence. I needed testimonies, connections, any lead that could expose this web of deceit. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." No signature, no indication of who sent it. Just a threat, plain and simple. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of the unseen force pressing down on me. Whoever was behind this wanted me to back off, but retreat wasn't in my nature. I had a duty: to uncover the truth, protect my identity, and bring these fraudsters to justice. I knew the next steps would be dangerous, but the line had been crossed and there was no turning back. Tomorrow, I would confront Karen. Not with empty threats, but with evidence and unyielding determination. The deeper I dug, the more I realized I was entangled in a conspiracy that went far beyond a mere HOA dispute. This was a calculated operation, and I was now at the center of it. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of the previous night's threat lingering in my mind. The anonymous text message, simple, direct, and chilling, was a stark reminder that I was not dealing with amateurs. I had already pieced together a solid foundation of evidence, but now I needed actionable leads that could expose the core of this operation. I began my day by focusing on the elderly neighbor who had seemed unusually nervous the day before. I knew approaching her directly might alert Karen or the others, so I decided to be subtle. I prepared a strategy to engage her without raising suspicion, acting as a curious local interested in the neighborhood dynamics. Around midday, I walked past her house, pretending to inspect the mailbox. The woman was on her porch knitting a scarf, her eyes briefly lifting as I passed. I smiled politely, trying to seem non-threatening. She offered a faint nod in return but avoided eye contact. I lingered near the sidewalk, casually glancing at her, hoping to catch any slip, any sign that she was connected to the bizarre events unfolding. After several minutes of silence, she stood up, clutching her knitting tightly, and began walking toward her garden. I matched my pace to hers, careful to remain at a distance that seemed coincidental. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I ventured, my voice light and conversational. She looked at me, her eyes weary and distant. "It is," she replied, her tone guarded but polite. "I've been living in this neighborhood for a while now," I continued, "and I'm curious about the history of the place. Seems like there's a lot of stories hidden behind these quiet streets." Her gaze sharpened for a brief moment, and I could see a flicker of fear, or perhaps guilt, cross her expression. "Most of the stories are best left untouched," she said quietly before turning away, retreating into her home. I didn't press further. Sometimes subtlety yielded better results than confrontation. Instead, I took out my phone and sent a discreet message to my contact at the bureau, briefing them about my attempt. Their response was quick and pragmatic. "Proceed slowly. She might be connected but is unlikely the mastermind." Next, I turned my attention to the black SUV. The rental agency linked to the vehicle was based in a neighboring state, and my contact at the bureau began running a background check on the account used to rent it. Preliminary results revealed the account was created using falsified identification, nothing traceable to a real person. The rental payments were made via untraceable prepaid cards, classic indicators of someone trying to cover their tracks. I knew I had to find out where the SUV was headed, who was driving it, and why. My plan was to set up a tail, but this would require extreme caution. I couldn't afford to reveal myself. I decided to rent a vehicle under an alias and begin surveillance discreetly. That afternoon, I drove to a small rental service in a neighboring town, choosing an inconspicuous vehicle. An older sedan with no distinguishing features. I parked near Karen's house, positioning myself in a way that I could observe without being observed. I monitored the cameras in real time from my laptop, making sure not to make any sudden movements. Around dusk, the black SUV returned. I started my tail from a safe distance, careful to maintain a buffer of several blocks to avoid being noticed. The SUV moved slowly through the streets, avoiding main roads, taking a series of convoluted turns as if trying to shake any pursuer. The drive lasted nearly an hour before the vehicle came to a stop near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I parked several blocks away and observed through binoculars. The warehouse was decrepit, with boarded-up windows and rusted metal doors. No signs of activity at first glance, but that changed quickly. A man stepped out of the SUV, followed by the same woman I had seen approach Karen the previous day. They entered the warehouse without hesitation, their movements synchronized, almost rehearsed. I recorded every step, knowing this was likely where their true operation was centered. My gut told me this warehouse held the answers I needed, but it also screamed danger. I considered calling in backup, but something inside me insisted I get more intel before involving others. My training taught me patience and preparation were the keys to survival in cases like this. As the night deepened, I continued to watch, documenting everything. At one point, the warehouse's exterior lights flickered on, illuminating the area briefly before plunging it back into darkness. The black SUV remained parked outside, as if standing guard, a silent sentinel in the night. Suddenly, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Stop now, or next time it won't be a warning." I stared at the message, the implications sinking in. This was no longer a game of bluff and intimidation. I was a target. My instincts screamed at me to pull back, but I refused. I couldn't back down now, not when I was this close. The warehouse remained quiet for hours, the occupants inside oblivious to my watchful eye. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the darkness, and the black SUV pulled away, disappearing into the distance without a trace. I decided to return home, my body tense but resolute. My next steps were clear. Investigate the warehouse, find out what was being hidden inside, and uncover the network behind Karen's charade. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed more evidence, more support, and a plan that wouldn't put me directly in harm's way. That morning, I contacted a trusted private investigator, someone I had worked with in previous cases, known for discretion and resourcefulness. I explained the situation in brief, providing him with the location, vehicle description, and behavior patterns. His response was immediate and supportive. "Leave it to me. I'll find out what they're up to." With that assurance, I began to focus back on Karen. Her history, her connections, and most importantly, the people who came and went from her home. My analysis revealed an unusual number of recent visitors, many of whom had no official records tying them to the area. They were ghosts, faceless shadows in the neighborhood's tapestry. I reviewed phone records one more time. A pattern began to emerge. Several calls between Karen's known numbers and a series of burner phones, all operating on different networks, but connected by timing. Calls were brief, typically lasting less than a minute at odd hours, often coinciding with suspicious A. My private investigator called just after dawn. His voice was steady, laced with the same professionalism I had come to rely on over the years. "I found something," he began. "The warehouse is registered under a shell company tied to a series of financial fraud cases in multiple states. The company itself doesn't officially exist, but it's been used as a front for several illicit activities over the past 5 years." I listened carefully as he detailed the connection. The rental of the black SUV was booked using an identity that matches no records in any government database. I also found surveillance footage from nearby traffic cams showing multiple trips between that warehouse and various locations known for shady deals, cash exchanges, drop-offs, and the like. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just about HOA control or petty harassment. It was a sophisticated criminal operation, likely involving identity theft, illegal surveillance, and possibly worse. "Good work," I replied, my tone firm. "Keep digging. I'll handle the Karen angle." I hung up and turned my attention back to Karen. My mind traced every step she had taken, every visitor that had come and gone from her home. She seemed to be the linchpin, the central figure in this operation. Her knowledge of the neighborhood and seemingly personal vendetta against me suddenly made sense. It was a calculated distraction, a way to keep me occupied while her real network operated in the shadows. Determined to get closer, I began researching her social circles, cross-referencing names and addresses. One name kept appearing, a man named Richard Hawkins. No official records linked him to the neighborhood, but old property records, social media scraps, and a few obscure business filings hinted at his involvement in various under-the-table dealings. My instincts told me he was Karen's partner in crime, possibly the true mastermind behind the operation. I decided the next step had to be direct surveillance of Richard's supposed hideout, a small, inconspicuous apartment complex a few miles from the neighborhood. I rented a vehicle under another alias, equipped with the same surveillance setup as before, and positioned myself strategically near his residence. Hours passed as I monitored his apartment, noting every movement. Around late afternoon, a series of visitors arrived, men and women dressed in unremarkable civilian clothes, each staying for no more than 20 minutes before departing. None of them A woman in her early been expecting you. Proceed carefully. The message was vague but promising. My plan was working. Meanwhile, the tension in the neighborhood grew palpable. My surveillance my fabricated but I was recipient of the transfer was registered under another fake identity, one linked to an abandoned property several miles away from the neighborhood. I knew this could be the final piece of the puzzle, a warehouse not far from Richard's hideout, likely serving as the central hub of their operation. I coordinated with my private investigator, instructing him to begin surveillance on that property immediately. Meanwhile, Karen's behavior grew increasingly erratic. My observations revealed more frequent and furtive visitors, late-night meetings, and encrypted phone calls. Her facade of normalcy was slipping, replaced by the calculated movements of a conspirator under pressure. One evening, I received another anonymous text message. "You're getting too close. Last warning." I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the financial data, connecting more dots. The shell company tied to the warehouse had multiple accounts, all funneling funds through various untraceable channels. The final destination: a massive cryptocurrency wallet with no public identifier, effectively untraceable. By now, my digital persona had become an accepted part of their communication chain. Mark Allen was viewed as an insider, a valuable asset capable of providing insights and securing new contacts. My messages were crafted carefully, never revealing too much, always hinting at the promise of further assistance. The most critical message came one night. "An important transfer is scheduled, tonight. The location is 47 Industrial Drive. Be there or step aside." That was the confirmation I had been waiting for. The drop-off was real, planned, and imminent. I knew this was my opportunity to gather undeniable evidence and confront the operation's core players. I prepared meticulously. My recorder, concealed cameras, and encrypted communication lines were all in place. I arrived at the location hours before the transfer, positioning myself in the shadows, my body tense but steady. The air was thick with anticipation, every second stretching like a drawn bowstring. Around midnight, the black SUV arrived once more. This time, its movement was deliberate, cautious. The vehicle parked strategically near the warehouse, ensuring that neither front nor back entrances were directly visible to the main road. From my vantage point, I observed Richard Hawkins step out, flanked by two others, both unknown to me until now. A third figure emerged from the warehouse, Lucas Freeman. His presence was no surprise now. The man I had suspected from the beginning, the linchpin holding the operation together. His eyes scanned the area, a calculating gaze that seemed to miss nothing. Richard approached Lucas with the envelope once more, the same type of exchange I had witnessed weeks before. This time, however, Lucas handed back a small briefcase in exchange. Their interaction was quick, professional, devoid of any emotion. The briefcase was then loaded into the black SUV. At that moment, my phone buzzed, Agent Mitchell's voice over a secure line. "Hold your position. We're moving in." I remained still, barely breathing, as a team of agents began to converge on the location. The operation was precise, coordinated, and swift. The moment the SUV's doors closed and the briefcase was secured, a team of federal agents stormed the warehouse. Chaos erupted. Richard, Lucas, and their accomplices scrambled, but the element of surprise was on our side. I watched from my concealed position as agents apprehended them one by one. Their expressions ranged from defiance to sheer disbelief. The operation that had seemed untouchable was unraveling in real time. Karen's house was raided next. The moment the agents stepped inside, the second woman and several others were found, each one connected to the elaborate network I had painstakingly exposed. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, surveillance equipment, multiple fake IDs, and a detailed ledger of the operation's financial transactions. As dawn broke over the neighborhood, the entire conspiracy was laid bare. The fraudulent HOA, the fake police officers, the anonymous threats, all part of a grand illusion designed to mask a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating under the radar for years. I stood by, watching the arrests unfold, knowing that my mission was nearly complete. The danger was far from over, but a sign, the truth had been exposed and the criminals brought to justice. But in the world of espionage and clandestine operations, closure was never absolute. My watch continued,